Dr. Neal Barnard. He's the man of the hour. He's a clinical researcher. He's a best-selling author. He is one of America's leading advocates for health, nutrition, and higher standards in research. He has been the principal investigator of several very famous human clinical research trials, all the results of which are published in peer-reviewed scientific medical journals. He's just examined really what are the key issues of health and nutrition. He's the founder and the president of the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, PCRM. He's also the president of the Cancer Project, which is a nonprofit organization advancing cancer prevention and cancer survival through nutrition education and research. And I've known him for, almost 15 years now. He's been coming many times, which we so appreciate and are so honored. He is a really warm, generous, and caring person. And speaking of honors, it's a great honor to introduce him to you all tonight. Dr. Neal Barnard.
Thank you, Jeff. It's great to be here. For those of you I haven't met, I haven't actually followed a healthy diet most of my life. I grew up in North Dakota, and my grandpa was busily raising cattle, and so was his father and his father and his father. And my father was in the cattle business, but he didn't like it very much, so he left and went to medical school and spent his life treating diabetes in Fargo. And I never once heard him say that a person with diabetes ever got better. And he always felt that people, where they would prescribe a diabetic diet, people didn't really want to follow it, and they didn't get much benefit, and it was just a one-way street toward more and more complications and so forth. And that was my view of American medicine. And I have to say, we ate very much like we were in the cattle business. Every day of my life, it was roast beef, baked potatoes, and corn, except for special occasions when it was roast beef, baked potatoes, and peas. And the year before I went to medical school, I had sort of an eye-opening experience. I was an assistant in the morgue of the hospital. When somebody died in the hospital, maybe from eating hospital food, we would have to examine the body. And one day we had a guy who died of a massive heart attack, and the pathologist knew that I was going to go to medical school, so he said, "Neal, I want you to pay close attention." And he took what looked like a garden clipper, and he went crunch, crunch, crunch through the ribs on one side of the chest, and then he went crunch, crunch through the ribs on the other side of the chest and yanked off the ribs and said, "Look at the coronary arteries." And he explained to me they're called coronary arteries because they crown the heart. And he took a scalpel and he sliced one open and he said, "Look inside." And instead of it being a wide open artery, it was clogged with what looked like chewing gum. Except he had me feel it, and it was hard, and that was atherosclerosis. And we looked at the carotid arteries, and they had the same problem, and the arteries to the legs, the arteries to the kidneys. He said, "We see these in about 3/4 of people by age 23, which was the age that I was at the time. So anyway, at the end of the exam, he walked out, and I took the ribs off the table, and I put them back in the chest, tried to make them fit with the other ribs, and sewed up the skin and cleaned up. And went up to the cafeteria, where it turned out they were serving ribs for lunch. And I have to say, I didn't become a vegetarian on the spot, but I couldn't eat that. Between the look of it and the smell of it, it was to me a dead body. And anyway, you know how it is. You kind of stick your foot in it, and it becomes a black hole that sucks you in, and pretty soon you're a vegan. Now, I have to say, Americans are still eating a lot of this. And a lot of this, and a lot of this. And a year ago, I wrote an article in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition where I looked at the trends in the American diet over the last 100 years. And I just want to walk you through it. In 1909, the USDA started keeping track of what Americans eat. And in 1909, your average person ate 123.9 pounds of meat in a year. One person per year. But what happened? Well, we've been going up and up and up, and as of about 2007, we were over 200 pounds every person every year. Well, where are we putting 75 pounds extra meat? This year, next year, next year, next year. Well, it's mostly chicken is the big increase. Beef is falling a little bit, but chicken is increasing. Americans now eat more than 1 million chickens per hour. It's about 10 billion per year because we think it's health food, and we're in the worst shape that we've ever been in. Let me say a special word of condemnation for cheese. Back in 1909, your average person ate 3.8 pounds of cheese in a year. But right around the 1960s, fast food chains came in. And any bun is a perfect place to stick a little slice of cheese under it. So a couple ounces of cheese would go on every fast food sandwich. And then pizza, which was not our thing back in 1909, became very popular. And you can connect your home to a restaurant with a telephone wire, and you can have dinner in 30 minutes. And kids will eat it, we can dump it in schools, the government starts promoting it, and pretty soon you've got Americans eating more than 30 pounds of cheese as of about 2005. As of 2011, your average American in a year's time eats about 34 pounds of cheese. Now, I'm not eating any, somebody else is getting mine. So it's bad enough that your average person is eating 30 pounds more cheese every single year compared to a century ago. But it's 70% fat. It's not good fat. It's saturated fat, bad fat. And it's 70%. If it was any worse, it would be Vaseline. And that's what people are eating and feeding to their children. Now, this will not be on the test, but the blue line is sugar, cane sugar and beet sugar. That's falling. But we are more than making up for it with high fructose corn syrup. That's the green line. You add it all together and you get, the red line is total sugar, and that's going up 30 or 40 pounds. So why are Americans overweight? I don't know. I guess we're not exercising enough. No, it's none of that. It's because we're eating 75 pounds more meat, 30 pounds more cheese, 30, 40, 50 pounds more sugar, every person this year, next year, the year after that, and we're feeding the same thing to our kids. It's all on the input side of the equation. And if you look at diabetes, this is back 1994, and there's North Dakota, where I grew up, and less than 4% of the population had diabetes. Here's Louisiana, Mississippi, more than 6%. But as the years go by, 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 2000, diabetes has just come right in dramatically. In 2006, we needed new colors for some political reason, but the map continues to change. So you don't see it just from one year to the next. But if you step back, you discover that we are on completely uncharted territory. We have never, as a country, had such a bad diet for so many people with such high rates of obesity and diabetes. Last year in America, we spent $120 billion just on medical treatment for diabetes. Well, anyway, I'm depressing myself. All right, but there is a better way. Researchers have said, who does better? And they've been very fond of studying Seventh-day Adventists. Now, I didn't know anything about the Adventist religion, but when I got to medical school, I noticed that people like to study them a lot. And the reason is that Adventists are supposed to not smoke, not drink alcohol, avoid caffeine, and not eat meat. And almost all Adventists are really good at the first three of those things. But some of them eat meat, some don't. So in 2009, the American Diabetes Association published this figure, where they looked at body mass index. And everybody's familiar with BMI, right? Should be below 25 to be healthy. It's your weight adjusted for your height. And the first group here are non-vegetarians, meat eaters. And they're not so healthy. They're 28.8. That's in the overweight range. And the second group is semi-vegetarians. They eat meat no more than once a week. They're a little bit thinner. And then you have pesco-vegetarians. What's that? That's fish, but they don't eat any meat at all except for fish. And they're a little skinnier. And then lacto-ovo-vegetarians. They're a little thinner. And then here's this group of vegans out here, and that's the only group where they're smack in the middle of the healthy weight range. Now, the reason the American Diabetes Association published this was not because of the weight, it was because of diabetes. And it's exactly the same graph, where the meat eaters have the most, the vegans have the least, and the other groups just slot in. And if you think about it in reverse, let's say you're following a diet with whole grains and beans and vegetables and fruits, and you decide, let me have an egg, a little bit of milk. Well, you're more likely to gain weight, and your diabetes inches up. Your diabetes risk inches up. How about some fish? Your weight goes up again, your diabetes risk takes a jump. How about meat? But not too often. Your waist goes up, your waistline goes up, and your diabetes risk goes up. And how about if you have meat every day? Well, then you're like average Americans. High risk for overweight, high risk for diabetes. So you don't have to be Adventist, you could be European. And the EPIC trial found exactly the same gradient. This is men, this is women. The vegans are the thinnest, the meat eaters are the heaviest, and the other groups just slot in. So my research team said, fine, let's introduce a diet like this for people who have never thought about going on a vegan diet before. We brought in 64 women. They were all overweight. They were all over the age of menopause. Every one of them had been on Atkins, South Beach, Jenny Craig, and so forth. And they had lost weight, but then it would come back. They would try a different diet, and they were on this kind of yo-yo thing. What we asked them to do was this: eat fruits and grains and legumes and vegetables, and not to limit their portions. We also asked them not to exercise and to not use a lot of oil. So the only food rules were vegan, low fat. We didn't want them to exercise. Exercise is good, but this is a scientific study of diet, and we didn't want to confound her. And it was 14 weeks. And a typical day's meals would be, let me see, something like blueberry pancakes, maybe oatmeal with cinnamon and raisins, half cantaloupe, rye toast, no butter. The foods that you're all familiar with. There were no portion sizes. They were free to eat as much as they wanted to. And I have to say, there are sometimes humiliations in the life of a researcher. We had every week, everybody would get together as a discussion group so they could share their successes and they could share their challenges and kind of support each other. And I think it was week 3, one of the women came in and said, Dr. Barnard, I found a treat that I can have on your low-fat vegan diet. And I'm thinking, uh-oh, what is this? And she opens her purse and she pulls out a pack of Twizzlers. You know Twizzlers? Sell them at the 7-Eleven. It's true. You look at the label, there's no animal products in them. There's no added oil. It's just sugary, starchy, artificially colored junk. And she made sure that all my research participants knew you can have all the Twizzlers you want on this diet. So my vegan, low-fat, Twizzler-fueled research participants set off on their path to the unknown. And as fate would have it, they lost about 13 pounds in 14 weeks. We tracked them a year later and then 2 years later, and they were skinnier at 2 years than at 1 year. They were skinnier at 1 year than at the beginning. In other words, unlike every other diet they'd ever been on, it was a one-way street. And their waists got thinner. And let me put a human face on this. This is Nancy. Nancy lost about 40 pounds over about a year's time. And she had diabetes. She stopped her diabetes medication. She was in better control on nothing than she was on medicine. And one day she came into the center to tell me about her cooking spaghetti. She had been home cooking spaghetti, and she cracked open a jar of spaghetti sauce, and she poured it in the pan, and she just stopped. She set the jar down. She looked at her hands. She had rheumatoid arthritis. And any of you who have rheumatoid arthritis, you know it starts at the base of your thumbs, and it spreads to the other joints, and whoever is making those vacuum-packed jars, they are obviously a sadist because you cannot open them up. And she realized her pain had just gone away, and she wanted to know why this was. And I mentioned to her that I'd written a book back more than 10 years ago called Foods That Fight Pain, because we found that the inflammation in the joints is caused by, in many cases, a foreign protein that elicits a reaction in the body. It causes the inflammation, that's the pain. You take that foreign protein out, you get better. Dairy is the most common. It's not the only one, there are others, but it's the most common. Bingo, she had no more pain. And maybe 50, 60, 70% of people with classic rheumatoid arthritis improve, or it just flat out goes away. So if you want to have a person really stick with your diet, cure their pain, make their symptoms go away. This is Vance. Vance was a policeman in Washington. His father was dead at age 30, Vance was 31 when he was diagnosed with diabetes. He was in his late 30s when he came in to see us. Lost 60 pounds over a year, stopped his diabetes medications. His diabetes became undetectable, which is something his personal physician had never ever seen before. And when I was asking Vance his permission to tell his story and to share it with other people, he said, make sure you tell everybody that my erectile dysfunction went away too. Okay, so how does it work? Why do you lose weight with this kind of diet? The first thing is a complete no-brainer. If you're eating vegetables and fruits, they have fiber. Fiber fills you up, holds water, doesn't have much in the way of calories, so you're full. And so all of these foods tend to be filling with very few calories. But Velveeta is not from a plant, it's from an animal, it doesn't have any fiber. Every last calorie in it, and every last calorie in an egg, every last calorie in chicken or turkey or beef, you get full advantage of it, so to speak. The second thing, though, is that you burn calories faster. We measure metabolism. The patient lies down on an exam table, and you put a little canopy over their head and shoulders, and you measure how much oxygen their body is using minute by minute, and how much carbon dioxide they're putting out. And you can measure their metabolism. Then you feed them a meal, and their metabolism goes up for about 3 hours after the meal, and you measure it. Except when they go vegan, you bring them back a couple months later, lie them down on the table, measure their metabolism, and feed them exactly the same meal. And what you find is that whole curve rises. They are suddenly burning calories faster than they were before. Not a lot, it's about 16% faster in the 3 hours after the meal. And so why are vegans skinny? It's because they're full sooner from all the fiber that they're eating, and they're burning calories faster for 3 hours after breakfast, 3 hours after lunch, 3 hours after dinner. It's automatic. You don't have to, nobody here is like starving and pushing away and thinking, I've really got to exercise extra tonight. None of that happens. The foods do it for you. And here is why. I'm going to stick a needle in your leg and pull out a muscle cell. Your muscles are your big calorie burners. And that muscle cell has a magical thing inside and another one. Those are mitochondria. Remember mitochondria from high school biology? Those are the burners inside your cell. They take fats and sugars and turn them into energy, and you've got a lot of them. The problem is, there's something else there. There's fat, and that fat is growing inside your cell. Now, doctors don't like words like fat, because it only has one syllable. So we're going to refer to it as it's intramyocellular lipid, but what it is, it's fat inside your cells. And how did it get there? It got there from eating beef, or eating chicken, or eating cheese, or olive oil, or fryer grease, or with almost no change. It goes from your digestive tract into your bloodstream, packs into your cells, and this is going to be on the test. This is very important. When your cell detects this bit of fat and it goes inside, your cell says, fantastic, that's great. I need this. Because your body was designed back when there were famines. And your body then stores that fat. And to store it, in case there is a famine, your body shuts down the production of mitochondria. And you could start a fatty diet on Monday. By Wednesday, you have fewer functioning mitochondria. In other words, you can't burn calories anymore. And have you heard people say, when I was 16, I could eat anything? But something's been happening. My metabolism is slowing down. I guess I'm just getting older. We are accidentally shutting down our own metabolism meal by meal by eating fatty animal-based foods. Your body is trying to store that in case there's a famine. You can reason with your body and say, I promise you, there's going to be extra food coming very soon, but your body is continuing to store it, and that's what happens. So, fat, are you all with me? Yeah. Okay, is this making sense? All right, so fat in your cells slows down your calorie burn, so it's ruining your metabolism. So what you need to do is the opposite. Get the animal products off your plate. How much animal fat is there left? None. Keep the oils kind of low. Don't take that bottle of olive oil and go glug, 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 all over your pasta. If you keep the oils low, it drains out of your cells. It's very quick. Okay? So, getting the fat out of your cells boosts your after-meal calorie burn. Let me share with you how we've applied this to diabetes. In 2003, NIH gave us a grant to test a vegan diet for diabetes, and it worked great. And diabetes is not caused by eating rice, or by eating bread, or by eating potatoes, or even by eating sugar. What it's caused by is fat builds up in the cell. And as fat builds up in the cell, this insulin, which is a key that goes into this lock, and it signals inside the cell to open these little channels and let sugar inside. When you've got too much gum in your lock, your key doesn't work anymore. If you've got too much fat in your cells, insulin doesn't work anymore. Fat inside cells causes insulin resistance. All you do, vegan diet, there's no animal fat, keep the oils really low, that drains out, your insulin works again, person gets better. Very simple. Now, if I can get to you as soon as you've been diagnosed, we're going to do well. If I get to you after you've had it for 20 years or 30 years, it's harder, but people improve. I had a man who had diabetes 19 years. He was on insulin 3 times a day, and he not only had high blood sugars, but he had a late complication called painful neuropathy. Every night, his feet were killing him because the nerves are being attacked by the disease process. And it doesn't just affect your body. Every doctor who's been treating people with diabetes, you know it affects your mind. You start realizing, I'm not living. You're losing ground year by year. And it took about 4 or 5 months. On a vegan diet, his neuropathy went away. And I said, it's better, right? He said, no, that's not what I said. It is gone. And I kept following him for years. It never came back. And I had never seen this before. And I started looking into it, and it happens all the time. And when your body starts recovering, just like the people that you saw in the video that Jeff showed, you're living again. And I turned to Jeff as we were watching that. I thought, the terrible thing is that these people had to live for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, with all of these symptoms and all of these medications, thinking that that was the best that they could do. So anyway, I'd like to talk to you about your car insurance. When I look out my office window, that's what I see. Geico's national headquarters is right near PCRM. And there are 2,500 people working there, and they're self-insured. So every time anybody goes on a cholesterol-lowering drug, they got to pay for it. So kind of the light went on at Geico saying, why don't we do a vegan diet here at Geico? So I said, let's do it. Anybody who wanted to go vegan would get 2 things. First thing was vegan food in the cafeteria. They have an employee cafeteria, and they have bacon and eggs for lunch, but they also have an oatmeal bar with cinnamon and raisins and sliced bananas, and they have greasy cheeseburgers for lunch, but they also have veggie burgers, portobello sandwich, a really nice salad bar. That's the first thing. And the second thing that they have is a discussion group. Once a week, anybody who wants to go vegan has a place that they can go at lunchtime. They bring their food, and we sit and we talk. Or we do a cooking demonstration. And we did it as a scientific study. This is the one in the Washington, D.C. area. At Fredericksburg, Virginia, they said, we'll check our weights, we'll check our cholesterols and everything that they're doing, but no diet change here. They're the control group. And what we found, oh, by the way, there were a few missteps along the way, I have to say. We had to work with the cafeteria. They were doing their best, I mean. Anyway, the people in Fredericksburg didn't lose any weight. This was July through December. Some people dropped out and they didn't lose anything, or they might have gained. The biggest weight loss we had was 46 pounds from July through December, but your average, including everybody, was 11. And their waists got skinnier. And I want to show you, these are my worst participants. This was Hillary and Bruce. And when I say worst, I mean that we had a discussion group and a cooking demonstration every single week. And they would show up and pay no attention at all. They sat in the back of the room. They would just chatter and look into each other's eyes and talk about things. And they were paying no attention. And I thought, what is with you people? But I realized you can misjudge people. And I misjudged them. I mean, they were talking, and it was kind of distracting, but what they were talking about was what they were going to pick up on the way home. at the grocery store, and how they were going to convince her parents to go vegan and what they would do at Thanksgiving so that they wouldn't have any wrinkles in their diet. In other words, they were really into it. And a year later, they sent me this picture. And the reason I'm showing you this is two things. The first is they are physically healthier. Bruce has lost 100 pounds, Hillary's lost 85 pounds. But the other thing is, Bruce told me, in Bruce's words, he said, I never exercised. I didn't want to exercise because first it hurts. When you got if you're 100 pounds overweight, it hurts. And you don't want people to see you jogging down the street and jiggling everywhere. And you don't want to go to a gym. And he said, I was embarrassed to do it. But when they changed their diets and the weight started coming off on its own, their metabolism is higher. Their appetite is tricked into just turning off. The weight starts coming off. Their energy starts going up. They're starting to feel not so embarrassed. And they realized that inside of them was an athlete. And they sent me this picture because they did their first half marathon. So the reason this is important is that when you gain weight, when you get a health diagnosis, when you're given your one-way street to more and more misery and more complications, it doesn't just affect you physically. It affects you psychologically, and you feel like, I can't do things that other people can do. And then you go on a diet and you lose a little bit of weight, but then you give up on it because it's just hard, and you think there's something wrong with me. And people memorize that, and the more diets they go on, the more times they fail, the more they blame themselves. And it becomes a toxic experience for them. But once they realized there was not one thing wrong with them, there never was. They were given a diet that was well-meaning, but it was not designed for the human body. And once you put the foods in your body that work, then you can not only pull your body back together, but you can get your mind repaired a little bit and start to argue back all those negative lessons that you've learned and realize you can do things that other people can. You can start that process of rebuilding and feeling good about yourself and feeling good about your kids. So this is the power plate. In 2009, we sent this to the USDA and we said, why not? The pyramid's a nice shape. But people don't eat off a pyramid. It requires a lot of abstraction. So this is what people do eat off. Why don't you do something like this? We sent it 2 years ago, and did you see what they came out with earlier this year? Not perfect, but kind of close. I have to say, at PCRM, our motto is, that's good, but not good enough. So we actually have a lawsuit in against the USDA to say, clean it up, you're almost there, get rid of the dairy group and get rid of the meat, and you're going to be okay. I'll let you know how we do. So, so if a person's thinking about starting this, how do you get there? How do you introduce it? The way everybody has their own way. I'm sure Michael's got his way, and Jeff has his way, and Don will do it maybe in a third way. But what I do with people is I say, don't change your diet right now. Just take a week and try different foods. Try some vegan foods and just see which ones you like. So I'll make a list, breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, and just take a week, start filling it in. See what you like. Okay, blueberry pancakes, I can make those vegan. I could do my oatmeal. You just start filling it in. And once you've got things that you have tried, you've tried the recipes, you've tried AJ's brownies, you figured out what it really works for you. Then, now, what I encourage, by the way, people think you're not going to eat. There's not, you can go Italian, they can have all kinds of stuff, Mexican restaurants, Chinese places. There is so much that you can eat. You can go fast food, right? So this is not the pinnacle of culinary art, but this is where people are eating. They can go vegan there, and so we encourage our patients to pick the healthier options. So once they know what they like, at that point, I say, let's do it all the way. Vegan, low fat, but only 3 weeks. This is our test drive. This is our kickstart. And, I can do anything for 3 weeks. At the end of that time, what I discover is that people are feeling healthier, but their tastes are changing, and they didn't expect that. But I have to remind them, when you switch from whole milk to skim milk, in fact, in this room, how many of you switched from whole milk to skim milk at some point in your life? Okay, when you did, what was the skim milk like at first? Water, it tastes water, it doesn't even look right, it's kind of blue. How many of you got used to it? Okay, did you ever go back and taste whole milk? What was that like? It's too thick. Well, your first week on a vegan diet, it's like that. It's too light. You think, oh, I've got to acquire a taste for folk music now, and I'm going to break out the tie-dye. Anyway, the second week it starts feeling normal. After about 3 weeks, you're there with it, and you start to feel good, and your energy's good. After 3 weeks, if you go back and have a double bacon cheeseburger, it just doesn't, it's no longer appealing. But if you try to explain that to a person in advance, they're not going to believe you. So the other thing is something I learned from my mom about transition foods. Growing up in Fargo, we did not eat a very healthy diet. And my mother kind of led the way, and she had a really high cholesterol. And after I got out of medical school and residency and I started writing books, I was telling my mother that she ought to try a vegan diet. It would get her cholesterol down. And she didn't think that was very good advice. And she completely ignored my entreaties that she do something about it. And every time I would go back home and I'd visit her, I would say, what's with your cholesterol? Well, it's a little bit higher than it should be, but I'll be all right. I'd say, Mother, you're going to have a heart attack. You've got to do something. Why don't you go vegan? Just completely ignored me. And I was puzzling about why this is. My patients listen to me. I write in peer-reviewed journals. I've been funded by NIH, and my own mother is not listening to me. And I finally realized I'm my mother's third-born child. Any of you third-borns here? Do you ever open up the family photo album? There's a lot of pictures of number 1 in there. There's some pictures of number 2, but to find you got to look in the index. So what that means is your parents may love you, but they know what a dribbling toddler is like. They're not really excited. They're not paying any attention to you. You can look your mother in the eye and you can say, Mother, you have atherosclerosis. You have hypercholesterolemia. She thinks it's cute, big words. She's not paying any attention to you. That's my mother. So she goes to her doctor, and the doctor says, enough. I'm going to put you on some medicine. I want you to take it. She says, okay, I'll take it. How long do I have to take it for? He says, you don't get it. I'm going to put you on a cholesterol-lowering drug. I want you to take it daily, forever, to control your cholesterol. She says, I have to take medicine forever for it to work. She doesn't like that idea. She says, I got to think about this. She goes home and picks up a book I wrote called Food for Life. Neal told me, I make these meals, my cholesterol level ought to go down. My mother does it. She starts a vegan diet. She does it for 7 weeks. She goes back to the doctor. The doctor gets her lab slip, and he looks at her cholesterol level. And he looks at my mother. And he looks at the cholesterol level, and he says, I need you to come back. There's something wrong with our laboratory. Her cholesterol had dropped 80 points. And he thought this was physiologically not possible. It's like your doctor, Sabrina. I was just like, no, this doesn't happen. And she says, wait a minute, if that's real, would I need medicine? He said, no, this is like a 12-year-old's cholesterol level. You wouldn't need anything at all. She says, thank you, I got it, bye. My mom goes home. She picks up the phone and calls me up and says, Neal, why didn't you tell me about this before? So my mother's got religion. She's decided a vegan diet is for everybody, starting with my dad. So my dad grew up on a cattle ranch, and he is not about to do this veg-an political thing that my mother has stumbled into. However, every man born in 1925 has one thing in common, and that is they don't cook. They don't prepare meals. They don't clean up. They don't know where the kitchen is. My father has never shopped for food in a day in his life. And he sits at a table, and when he's hungry, food comes. When he's done, the plates go. Stick around 3 or 4 hours, it starts again. And that's been the arrangement for decades. And so my mother takes full advantage. She goes to the store and gets a good bread, some Dijon mustard, which in Fargo is saying something, and she'll get some romaine lettuce and some plum tomatoes, and she slices them up, and she'll put some phony bologna on top, like fake meat. It could be ham or turkey, but it's the soy versions of these things, or gluten. It's vegetarian meats. Gives them to my dad. Doesn't detect a thing. Says, this is fine, Margaret, sure. He thinks it's great. So anyway, the reason I'm telling you this is, it's been years now, and he hasn't really detected it. And I've got 2 vegetarian parents, and only one of them actually knows it. So The thing is, these fake meats are not really a wonderful thing necessarily. I view them as sort of a bridge to get people from where they are to healthier foods, But like there are times when they're very handy. If the neighbor kids are coming over for birthday, do not make them lentil loaf. They're going to beat your kid up. What you got to do is give them veggie hot dogs, and they'll think that's a cool political statement. So those are the transition foods. Just a few resources. We've got lots of books based on the work that we've been doing. And one thing, have any of you done our Kickstart program? We've had a lot of fun with this. It's just an online program. We've had 150,000 people do it. And every day you get an email from Alicia Silverstone or one of our many doctors who are involved, and it just helps people to go vegan. We're going to India. We're also going to China. And the reason is China and India are the two biggest countries on the planet. They are rapidly losing their plant-based traditions. China has increased meat intake 50% in the last 10 years. I was meeting with a Chinese doctor yesterday who told me they're seeing diabetes like they've never seen it before. So in March, we're doing Kickstart in Mandarin. In November, we have an English language one for all parts of China. So we're really excited about that. And please do spread the word. It's all free. It's free of commercial sponsorship. And we really are hoping that people will take advantage of it. It's all culturally appropriate recipes and Bollywood stars. And it's a lot of fun. The last thing that I just want to say is the reason this kid looks nervous is if you look at what is happening. A generation ago, we did not have such a healthy population back then. We had more heart attacks than people had in Asia. Meat eaters were much less healthy than vegetarians. But we were great then compared to where we are today. Childhood obesity is off the scale. And it's in large part because we're wealthier than we have been. By that I mean we're not spending so much on food. But it's also part of it is intentional. By intentional, I mean the U.S. Congress sits down and decides every 5 years how much money we're going to give to the dairy industry. How much money are we going to put into raising feed crops for cattle and hogs and chickens? And how much are we going to put into fruits and vegetables? Well, there's how much we're going to put into fruits and vegetables. You need a microscope to see that. Well, we made a proposal about what ought to happen. Right now, Congress is starting to take up the Farm Bill again. And we suggested that farmers are good, honest folks. But you do not need to write a check to every farmer in America who makes more income than your average American. You don't need to send them a check for raising feed grains, for livestock. Encourage them to raise healthier things. When they have ups and downs, like every other industry, the car industry or the computer industry or any others, they can take care of their own changes. The U.S. government does not have to cover their crop insurance. When they pollute, they should clean it up. If you've got a big concentrated feeding operation that is putting mess into the waters, you ought to be held responsible for that, as opposed to what happens right now is that the taxpayers have to clean all that up. The most controversial part of this is food stamps. Now it's called SNAPs, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. And right now, every year that costs about $70 billion. Because what it is, it's a credit card that you can get up to about $200 a month to spend at the store. And 1 in 7 Americans now gets it. And I think they should get food benefits. But the problem is that card buys M&Ms and sodas and Velveeta just as much as it does brown rice and beans. So what we have done is we've devised a plan that says there was a time when for any American, whatever your level of income, candy was a treat. It wasn't free for anybody. And why don't we do this? Why don't we say, I want people to have the healthiest foods. Let's have brown rice and beans and vegetables and fruits for adults and for kids, wherever they may be, and let's leave it. And if a person says, I want soda, the answer is fine, you can have a soda, but you're going to pay for it. I'm not giving you that free. And if we do that, do you know who our biggest opponents are right now? When we advocate for that on Capitol Hill, our biggest opponents, the biggest defenders of the current food assistance program is not economically disadvantaged people. Our biggest opponent is Kraft Foods and Hormel and Smithfield, because they know that that credit card does not go for gasoline. It does not go for a book. It doesn't go for a car payment. It's going to be spent on their product. And they view this as a shot in their corporate arm. And they don't want people to just have brown rice and vegetables and fruits and healthy foods. Mars wants you to buy candy. And they want the government to tax you to buy it. And if our program goes through, every American will save $176 a year, because that's what you're paying now for junk. And that's why we have a population that's unhealthy. And I personally think it is demeaning to assume that economically disadvantaged people somehow feel they have to have junk food. Every one of us, whatever our economic level, knows that free food dangled in front of us and tempting us is not really such a good thing. And if I'm getting the healthiest things for my family and my kids, then that's the best favor of all. Okay, and the last thing is the commodity reform. Not to get so technical, that's when the government says, cheese prices are falling, let's buy it up and put it in kids' lunches at school. Why do you think there's so many cheeseburgers and cheese pizza in school? It's not for the kids, it's for the farmers, and it's done to stabilize their prices, and that's 100% wrong. When a kid is growing up, they should have only healthy foods, and they should have that in the school lunch, but they should have nothing else dangled in front of them at all. So if we do that, over the next 10 years, that's the figure that we're going to save, $383 billion. And we've given this to the super committee that's now meeting in Congress, and I can tell you that every single member of Congress is going to say, I don't want to go there, because if I vote against the dairy industry, if I vote against the meat industry, do you think I'm going to have a job after the next election? That is what our country is dealing with. And so here's what we have to do. What we have to do is recognize that there are farmers, and they are good folks, and there are people who work for the food retailers, and they are good people too. But they're advocating for things that sometimes are good and sometimes are not. What we have to do is realize that if we can get the bad foods off our plates and off our kids' plates, we're not just going to save money on food stamps and on school commodity programs. We're going to save money on health care like crazy. We're going to completely change the debate that we have right now. And the most important thing is that families that are now torn apart by disease, like the people we saw in the video that Jeff showed, we can put that as a thing in the past. Do you remember? I want people to say, do you remember when diabetes was a real big problem? Do you remember when everybody was overweight and before we realized that we had to go on a better path? It starts with each of us individually. None of us was raised on a healthy diet, but it starts by exploring it, getting used to it, and then once we get comfortable with it, telling other people, sharing the tools that we've had, working with the schools, working with our businesses, making this the norm. Because even though there are an awful lot of people who are demanding subsidies for unhealthy foods, there are far more worried parents, worried doctors, worried teachers. And the problem is that the parents and the teachers and the doctors are silent. But if we get together and we organize and we call our members of Congress and say, you work for me, we're going to change this world, we will win. It's as simple as that. We've just got to get noisy. We've got to get organized. We've got to really make our voices heard. If we do that, we'll revolutionize the health of this country. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks, Sabrina. Thanks a lot. Thank you. Thanks a lot.